The lioness appeared at the edge of Themba's village just after sunrise, moving slowly through the morning mist like a ghost. She was carrying something in her mouth, something small and limp that hung motionless as she walked. Themba was the first to see her. He'd been up early, as he always was, tending to the small garden behind his hut in the Okavango Delta region of Botswana. At 56 years old, he was a healer in his San community, known for his knowledge of medicinal plants and his ability to treat injuries that modern doctors couldn't reach. But nothing in his decades of experience had prepared him for what he saw that morning. The lioness stopped 30 meters from the village and gently laid down what she'd been carrying. It was a cub, maybe 8 weeks old, its small body completely still. Then the lioness did something that made Themba's blood run cold. She looked directly at him and made a sound he'd never heard a lion make before. Not a roar, not a growl, a cry. A wailing, desperate sound that was unmistakably the voice of a mother in anguish. She was asking for help. Themba stood frozen, his mind racing. Lions didn't do this. Predators didn't bring their dying young to humans for help. It defied every law of nature, every rule of survival. But the lioness cried out again, nudging her cub with her nose, then looking back at Themba. Her amber eyes were filled with something he'd seen 1,000 times in human mothers: desperation, grief, and a last shred of hope. Themba's wife, Kosi, emerged from their hut and gasped. "Themba, get inside. There's a lion." "I see her," Themba said quietly. "She's not hunting. She's begging." Other villagers were emerging now, alerted by the lioness's cries. Themba's brother, Tao, came running with a spear. "I'll drive her off." "No," Themba said sharply. "Don't threaten her. Something's wrong. She brought her cub to us. She wants help." "That's impossible," Tao argued. "Lions don't." "Look at her," Themba interrupted. "Really look." Everyone fell silent, watching. The lioness was making no aggressive moves. She wasn't stalking. She wasn't crouching. She was sitting beside her motionless cub, crying out every few seconds, looking at the humans with pleading eyes. Themba made a decision that everyone would later call either the bravest or most foolish thing they'd ever witnessed. He put down the garden tool he'd been holding and began walking slowly toward the lioness, his hands empty and visible. "Themba, no," Kosi shouted. "She'll kill you." But Themba kept walking, speaking softly in his language, his voice calm and gentle. "I see you, mother. I hear your pain. Let me look at your baby. Let me see if I can help." The lioness watched him approach. Her muscles tensed, but she didn't move away. When Themba was 10 meters away, she stood and took 3 steps back, giving him access to the cub but keeping close enough to attack if he made any threatening move. Themba knelt beside the tiny cub and his heart sank. The baby lion was barely breathing. His small chest rose and fell in shallow, irregular gasps. His eyes were closed, his body burning with fever. Themba could see the problem immediately: a massive infection in the cub's right front paw. The paw was swollen to twice its normal size, the skin stretched tight and discolored. Themba looked up at the lioness. "I understand now. Your baby is dying from infection. You tried everything you knew, and when nothing worked, you brought him to me." The lioness made that heartbreaking crying sound again. "But why me?" Themba wondered aloud. Then he noticed something, a distinctive scar pattern on the lioness's left shoulder. 3 parallel lines, old and faded, but unmistakable. His breath caught. 7 years ago, maybe 8, he'd treated a young lioness who'd been caught in a poacher's wire snare. The wire had cut deep into her shoulder, creating 3 parallel wounds. Themba had been gathering plants when he'd heard her distress calls. Against all advice, he'd approached, cut away the wire, and treated the wounds with a healing paste made from local plants. He'd never expected to see that lioness again. He'd certainly never imagined she would remember him. "It's you," Themba whispered. "You remember me. You remember that I healed you." The lioness's ears pricked forward at his voice. Themba looked back at the dying cub, then at the lioness, then at his village where dozens of people now watched in stunned silence. He called out to his wife in their language, "Kosi, bring my medicine bag. The large one." And bring clean water, cloth, and the honey jar. You're going to treat a lion cub? Tao shouted in disbelief. I'm going to try. Themba replied. If I don't, he'll die. And she knows it. That's why she brought him to me. For the next 3 hours, Themba worked on the cub while the lioness watched from 6 meters away. Every time Themba touched the cub, the lioness would tense, a low rumble vibrating in her chest, but she never attacked, never intervened. The infection was severe. Themba had to lance the swollen paw to drain the pus, a procedure that would have been agonizing if the cub hadn't been so close to death. The little lion barely reacted. Themba cleaned the wound with water boiled with medicinal plants, then packed it with a paste made from wild honey, aloe, and crushed leaves from the devil's claw plant, a powerful anti-inflammatory that grew in the Kalahari. He wrapped the paw carefully in clean cloth. But the cub's fever was dangerously high. Themba mixed a tea from fever-reducing herbs and, drop by drop, got some of the liquid into the cub's mouth. Most of it dribbled out, but some went down. That's all I can do, Themba finally said, exhausted. Now it's up to him and the ancestors. He stood slowly and backed away from the cub. The lioness immediately moved forward, sniffing her baby thoroughly, checking the bandage, licking the cub's face. Then she did something that made every witness gasp. She looked at Themba, held his gaze for a long moment, and dipped her head, a gesture that looked remarkably like a bow of gratitude. She gently picked up her cub in her mouth and began walking back toward the bush. But after a few meters, she stopped and looked back at Themba, as if asking him to follow. She wants you to come with her, Kosi said, her voice filled with wonder. That's insane, Tao protested. She'll lead you into her territory and what? Themba interrupted. Kill me after I just saved her cub? She's taking him somewhere safe, and she wants me to come because she knows he'll need more treatment. You can't be serious. I am. I'm going. Before anyone could stop him, Themba grabbed his medicine bag and began following the lioness. She moved slowly, constantly checking to make sure he was following, adjusting her pace to match his. They walked for almost an hour, moving deeper into the bush. Themba's heart pounded the entire time, but he forced himself to stay calm, to trust the impossible bond he'd formed with this lioness years ago. Finally, she led him to a den, a natural hollow beneath an outcropping of rock, well hidden and protected. She gently placed the cub inside, then looked at Themba expectantly. You want me to treat him here? Themba asked. Where you can watch over him? The lioness settled down at the den's entrance, her posture making it clear. Yes, treat him here. For the next 3 days, Themba made the journey to the den twice daily. Each time, the lioness would be waiting, allowing him to approach, to change bandages, to administer his herbal medicines, to check the cub's fever. Villagers thought he'd lost his mind. Kosi begged him to stop. But Themba continued, driven by something he couldn't fully explain. A sense that this was important, that this impossible relationship between human and lion meant something profound. On the 4th day, when Themba arrived at the den, the cub was sitting up. His eyes were open, bright and alert. His fever had broken. The swelling in his paw had gone down dramatically. The little cub saw Themba and made a small chirping sound, the noise lion cubs make when greeting family members. Themba felt tears sting his eyes. You're going to make it, little one. You're going to survive. The lioness walked over to Themba and did something extraordinary. She rubbed her head against his leg, the way domestic cats do to mark someone as family, as safe, as trusted. Themba reached down slowly and placed his hand on her head. For a moment, man and wild lioness stood connected, bridging a gap that should never have been bridged. Then the lioness pulled away and returned to her cub, and Themba knew his work here was done. Before we continue, make sure to hit like and subscribe. Where are you watching from? Drop your country name in the comments. Now let me tell you what happened next, because this story is far from over. Themba visited the den one last time, 5 days after the lioness had first appeared at his village. The cub was walking now, putting weight on his healing paw, playing with his mother, showing all the signs of a healthy young lion. You don't need me anymore, Themba said to the lioness. You can care for him now. The lioness watched him with those intelligent amber eyes, and Themba could have sworn she understood every word. He turned to leave, expecting never to see her again. But as he walked away, the lioness made a soft chuffing sound, a friendly call. Themba looked back. She was still watching him, and in her gaze was something unmistakable: gratitude, trust, and a promise. Themba returned to his normal life. The story of what he'd done spread across the region, drawing wildlife researchers, journalists, and conservationists who all wanted to understand how a wild lioness had sought help from a human. Dr. Naledi Moyo, a wildlife veterinarian from Gaborone, arrived at the village 3 weeks after the incident. She was skeptical, wildly skeptical, until she interviewed Themba and a dozen witnesses, all of whom told exactly the same story. "I need to see this lioness," Dr. Moyo said. "I need to verify that this actually happened." "She lives in the bush," Themba replied. "I can't just summon her." "But you know where her den is?" "I do." "Will you take me there?" Themba hesitated, then agreed. 2 days later, he led Dr. Moyo and 2 assistants into the bush, following the same path he'd walked so many times. When they reached the den area, Themba stopped and called out softly in his language, not expecting an answer, just announcing their presence. To everyone's shock, the lioness emerged from tall grass about 50 meters away. The cub, now noticeably bigger and healthier, walked beside her. Dr. Moyo froze. "That's a wild lioness." "Yes," Themba said. "And she's walking toward us." "Yes." "Themba, we need to back away slowly." "No," Themba said calmly. "She's not hunting. She's greeting." The lioness approached to within 20 meters and sat down. The cub stayed close to her side, curious about the strangers but trusting his mother's calm demeanor. Dr. Moyo's hands shook as she raised her camera and took photos. "This shouldn't be possible. Wild lions don't behave like this around humans." "This one does," Themba said simply. The lioness watched them for several minutes, then stood and led her cub back into the tall grass. But before disappearing completely, she looked back at Themba one more time. Dr. Moyo turned to Themba, her professional skepticism completely shattered. "I need to study this. This could change everything we know about lion behavior and cognition." Over the next 6 months, Dr. Moyo set up a research project focused on Themba's lioness and her family. They used camera traps and tracking collars, documenting behavior patterns. What they found was remarkable. The lioness, Dr. Moyo called her Naledi, which meant star, in Setswana, showed unusual tolerance for humans, specifically for Themba's community. When villagers encountered Naledi while gathering plants or checking livestock, she would typically move away calmly rather than display aggression. More incredibly, she seemed to teach this behavior to her cubs. As the young male Themba had saved grew older, he showed the same unusual tolerance. So did 2 other cubs Naledi gave birth to the following year. It's cultural transmission, Dr. Moyo explained in her research papers. Naledi learned that specific humans could be helpful rather than threatening. She's passing that knowledge to her offspring. We're witnessing the emergence of learned prosocial behavior toward humans in wild lions. But the most extraordinary incident happened 8 months after Themba had first treated Naledi's cub. Themba's grandson, 6-year-old Kagiso, wandered away from the village while playing. By the time his absence was noticed, he'd been gone for over an hour. The village organized search parties immediately. The bush was dangerous for a small child alone. They searched for 2 hours, calling Kagiso's name, growing increasingly desperate. Then one of the searchers, Themba's nephew, came running back to the village, his eyes wild. "You need to come see this. You won't believe, just come." The entire search party followed him to a clearing about 2 kilometers from the village. And there, sitting under a tree, was Kagiso, completely unharmed, looking more confused than frightened. And sitting beside him, like a guardian, was Naledi. When the lioness saw the humans approaching, she stood and made a low chuffing sound, not aggressive, but clear. "The child is safe, come get him." Themba approached slowly, speaking to Naledi in the same gentle tone he'd used when treating her cub. "Thank you for protecting him. Thank you for not harming him." Naledi watched as Themba scooped Kagiso into his arms. The little boy immediately started crying, not from fear of the lion, but from being lost and scared. "The big cat stayed with me," Kagiso said through his tears. "I was scared and then she came and sat with me. She didn't hurt me, grandfather. She was nice." Naledi held Themba's gaze for a long moment, then turned and walked away into the bush. The search party stood in stunned silence. A wild lioness had found a lost human child and, instead of viewing him as prey, had protected him until humans could retrieve him. Dr. Moyo, when she heard the story and saw the camera trap footage that confirmed it, could hardly believe the data. "This is unprecedented. Naledi didn't just tolerate human presence, she actively protected a human child. She's repaying the debt. She's showing gratitude that extends across species." The story attracted international attention. News crews came from South Africa, Namibia, even from Europe and America. Everyone wanted to know about the lioness who asked a human for help and then saved a human child. But Themba avoided most of the interviews. He wasn't interested in fame. He was interested in understanding the bond he'd formed with Naledi, understanding what it meant for how humans and wildlife could coexist. 2 years after the original incident, Themba was gathering medicinal plants when he heard a familiar sound, the chuffing call that Naledi used to greet him. He looked up and saw her approaching with 3 adolescent cubs, including the male he'd saved. The young male was now almost full-grown, healthy and strong, with no trace of the life-threatening infection that had nearly killed him as a cub. He moved with confidence, his muscles rippling under his golden coat. Naledi led her cubs to within 15 meters of Themba, then sat down. She seemed to be showing them, "This human is safe, this human is family, remember him." The young male Themba had saved looked at him with eyes that showed recognition. Then he did something that made Themba's breath catch. He bowed his head, exactly as his mother had done years before. The other cubs watched and imitated the gesture. Naledi was teaching them that not all humans were threats, that some humans could be trusted, that a debt of gratitude should be honored. Themba placed his hand over his heart, a gesture of respect and love. "I see you, Naledi. I see your family. You honor me with your trust." The lioness made a soft rumbling sound, almost like a cat's purr but deeper, resonating through the earth, then led her cubs back into the bush. That was the last time Themba saw Naledi alive. 6 months later, camera traps found her body. She'd died from injuries sustained in a territorial fight with another lioness. A natural death, the circle of life in the wild. She was approximately 9 years old, which was a good long life for a wild lioness. But her legacy lived on. The 3 cubs she'd raised, especially the male Themba had saved, maintained the unusual tolerance toward Themba's community. They taught their own cubs the same lessons. Dr. Moyo continued her research for 5 more years, documenting what she called the Naledi lineage, a family of lions that showed unprecedented prosocial behavior toward a specific human community. Her research fundamentally changed how scientists understood animal cognition, memory, and cultural transmission. Naledi proved that lions could form complex, reciprocal relationships with humans based on trust, gratitude, and mutual benefit. Today, Themba is 70 years old. He still lives in the same village, still works as a healer, still treats anyone, human or animal, who needs his help. Sometimes, when he's out gathering plants, he'll encounter Naledi's descendants. They watch him calmly, sometimes making that soft chuffing sound of recognition, sometimes simply observing before moving on. The villagers have learned to live alongside these lions in relative peace. They protect their livestock but don't hunt the lions. The lions hunt wild prey but leave the village animals alone. It's a fragile balance, maintained by memory and mutual respect. And in villages across Botswana, when people talk about coexistence between humans and predators, they tell the story of Themba and Naledi, the healer who saved a dying cub, and the lioness who repaid that debt by protecting his family for generations. If this story moved you, please share it. Tell us in the comments, have you ever helped an animal that later helped you? Hit like and subscribe for more stories that prove the bonds between humans and animals can transcend everything we think we know about nature. Because somewhere in the Okavango Delta, lions with unusual trust toward humans still walk the land, carrying in their behavior the memory of a crying lioness who brought her dying baby to a healer, and the unbelievable connection that formed when compassion bridged the gap between species. Sometimes the wildest creatures teach us the deepest lessons about gratitude. Sometimes a mother's love transcends every boundary. And sometimes saving one small life creates ripples that change the world. The circle of life isn't just about survival. It's about connection, memory, and the extraordinary things that happen when we choose compassion over fear, when we offer help even to those who should be our enemies, when we remember that all living things share this planet together.